What happens when country music's biggest personality meets morning television's toughest interviewer, and neither one backs down? The answer shocked millions of viewers and ended with security being called to Studio 1A. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment because this story gets wild fast. Blake Shelton walked onto the Today Show set that morning expecting the usual easy banter about chart positions, sold-out tours, and maybe a joke or two about his Oklahoma roots. He was relaxed, smiling, waving to the audience, fully prepared for another forgettable promotional stop. But from the moment the cameras went live, something felt different. Savannah Guthrie's greeting was polished, but there was an edge beneath it, a sharp focus that immediately shifted the energy in the studio. She didn't waste time easing into the conversation. Instead, she leaned forward and brought up the songwriting credit controversy surrounding Blake's latest single. 3 writers, she said, were claiming they hadn't been properly compensated. The words landed heavier than anyone expected. Blake's grin flickered for a split second before he leaned back. Trying to regain control, he brushed it off, saying his team handled business matters and that any confusion would be resolved. But Savannah wasn't done. She reached for a thick manila folder and calmly revealed signed statements from the writers, including one who was considering legal action. The audience murmured as Blake's posture stiffened. His tone hardened as he pushed back, accusing the show of ambushing him with legal issues that didn't belong on morning television. Savannah countered smoothly, saying fans deserved to know how the music they loved was made and whether collaborators were treated fairly. Blake snapped back, his voice rising, insisting he'd been real with fans for over 20 years and didn't need a gotcha interview to define his character. The tension in the studio became impossible to ignore. Savannah pressed again, questioning whether accountability was part of being a public figure. Blake accused her of chasing ratings instead of truth. The smiles were gone now. Producers waved frantically from behind the cameras, but neither of them slowed down. What was supposed to be a light interview had turned into a confrontation, and everyone in the room could feel that it was only just beginning. Blake's irritation grew as Savannah shifted topics, bringing up his recent criticism of streaming platforms and contrasting it with his label's aggressive streaming deals. He laughed sharply, calling the question hypocritical, then fired back by accusing the network itself of underpaying independent artists. For the first time, Savannah's composure faltered. She tried to redirect, but Blake seized the opening, calling out what he saw as media double standards. Voices rose. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Savannah reminded him that accountability wasn't a personal attack, but Blake stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward across the floor. The sound echoed through the studio. Cameras zoomed in as he accused her of conducting a hit job instead of journalism. Savannah remained seated, gripping her notes, telling him to sit down so they could talk like adults. Blake refused, saying adults didn't ambush guests on live television. When Savannah pushed back, stating that publicly documented disputes were fair game, Blake stepped closer to the desk, towering over her. He called her sweetheart, and the word changed everything. Savannah's voice dropped, cold and precise, asking if he truly thought it was acceptable to speak to her that way on national television. Blake doubled down, accusing NBC of scandals and naming fired colleagues. Audible gasps filled the studio. Phones came out despite the rules. Savannah stood now, matching his stance, defending her work and her colleagues while calling his behavior dismissive and aggressive. Blake laughed bitterly, listing his charitable work and accusing her of tearing people down for a living. She fired back just as hard, saying holding powerful people accountable was her job and that the songwriters mattered. Blake snarled that they'd be paid if they deserved it, dismissing her authority entirely. The argument was no longer controlled. Producers were visibly panicking. Security began edging closer. This was no longer an interview. It was a public power struggle unfolding live, with neither side willing to yield. Blake's anger escalated as Savannah pointed out a pattern of disputes with former collaborators, managers, and band members. She asked when he would consider that the problem might not be everyone else. The question hit hard. Blake denied everything, calling it gossip. Savannah pulled out more statements, offering to read them on air. Blake slammed his hands onto the desk, rattling equipment and spilling coffee. The sound shocked the audience. He shouted that nothing else would be read from her folder and accused the show of fabricating narratives for drama. Savannah corrected him sharply, reminding him whose show it was and stating the documents were sworn affidavits. Blake mocked her ethics, accusing her of turning private disputes into public spectacles. Savannah defended her integrity, citing her career holding powerful people accountable. Blake laughed cruelly, mocking her awards and even bringing her parents into the argument. That was the breaking point. Savannah snapped back, defending her family and accusing Blake of acting like a bully protected by fame. Blake moved closer, invading her personal space. Repeating the condescending term again, Savannah told him to back off, warning him he was threatening a journalist on live television. Blake claimed he was making promises, not threats, declaring he'd never return to the network and would warn other artists about their tactics. Savannah called his behavior childish and insisted this was professional, not personal. Security was now fully on set, radios crackling as additional guards were summoned. The cameras struggled to frame both of them as the standoff intensified. The audience sat frozen, watching a moment that would be replayed for years. Blake turned to the cameras, addressing viewers directly, condemning what he called modern journalism built on ambush and character assassination. Savannah snapped back, reminding him he was a guest who had disrespected the platform and its viewers. She insisted accountability wasn't optional for someone who profited from public trust. Blake roared that his fans trusted him because he'd earned it, not because of media approval. Security finally stepped between them as producers cut audio, desperately trying to regain control of the broadcast. The confrontation ended not with closure, but with chaos. The segment never aired in full, but clips leaked within hours, igniting debates across social media, news outlets, and fan communities. Some praised Savannah for holding a powerful figure accountable. Others sided with Blake, accusing the show of crossing a line. What was undeniable was that this was no ordinary morning television moment. It was a collision of ego, power, and accountability, played out live before millions. And long after the studio lights dimmed and the audience was escorted out, one question lingered louder than any shout that morning. When fame meets scrutiny, who really gets to control the narrative?